Hey everyone, Anarch here, and this is another episode of Anarch Abridged, where I just sit down and talk to the camera about some topic that's on my mind. And the topic of today's video is one that is very contentious in all different kinds of political circles. Whether you are the sort who are getting your news from television or Twitter, whether you are a radical or you are a liberal or a conservative, this issue is important to you in one way or another, and that is guns. So if you want to hear the position of a revolutionary anarchist on the issue of guns, then stick around after the intro, because that is going to be the topic of today's conversation. So the topic of today's conversation is understandably very contentious. After all, guns are weapons, and weapons are means for us to harm other people. And more than that, the firearm is probably the most effective personal defense weapon, or rather a human-to-human weapon that we have ever developed. That is to say, it is relatively compact. It can be carried on a person relatively easily, and yet it is able to kill people with considerate ease. Comparing that to, for example, medieval weaponry, with a sword or an axe or something, you really had to get up on somebody to do harm to them. And it would have been very difficult to dispatch a large number of people. Whereas, clearly, I think as either news or any amount of reading war history is going to tell you, the gun is much more proficient than that. It allows a person at a distance to harm or kill another human being, and maybe many human beings if they are at all proficient with that firearm. With that in mind, and with the spate of school shootings and public massacres that have taken place, I understand how people have very extreme or heightened emotional responses to the topic of firearms. But here's the thing. Firearms are not going away. They are a tool that is very good at carrying out its purpose. Once a technology has been developed, it's not ever going to be undeveloped. The knowledge will always lie within us to use that technology, to redevelop it, to build replacements. And though I understand the desire to regulate firearms, after all studies show that the reduction of the number of firearms in a society lowers the number of suicides and homicides and so on. There is no society where we are going to eliminate guns from existence. And insofar as that there is any elimination of guns that takes place, it will only ever be for the people, will never be for the state. What that means is the state will always have access to firearms, their military, and as we've seen in many places, even their police forces. And I know that many of you may live in nations where your police force does not walk around with a gun on their hip, but I think you'll find that if your protests ever turn into something that is, a real threat, they will come out with guns. They may not come out with live ammo, but indeed, they will begin to escalate. And the worse things get, the more they will bring out guns. So what I'm really, trying to point out here is that a society where we have banned a large number of firearms is not a society where we've gotten rid of firearms. It's a society where the people are no longer able to own firearms. That's important if you are a revolutionary. Because no matter what kind of revolutionary strategy that you have, the time will eventually come when the state will see you as a threat. When it will see us as a collective of people as a threat. And when that time comes, no amount of, peaceful protesting or pleading on the news is going to stop them from doing what they want to do. Even though it's understandable to hold a pacifist view within the scope of society as it currently stands, pacifism will never overthrow the state of society as it stands. There has never been a pacifist revolution, and there never will be, because revolution is fundamentally something that is disruptive, that challenges old norms and power structures. And I'll clarify here because, all kinds of people might be watching this video. When I say revolution, I don't even necessarily mean an armed coup which overthrows the state. I actually even mean this in the sense of a slow transformative revolution where we create new power structures that stand in society and are able to slowly transform the conditions of society until we no longer need the previous structures. We no longer need those hierarchical power structures. Even that kind of revolution eventually will come into conflict with the previous structures. No power structure is going to be okay with being phased out or replaced, especially not hierarchical power structures. They are always going to see us as a threat. The only reason they ever allow us to exist without crushing us outwardly is because they don't yet view us as a substantial threat. They think they can ignore us. But when the time comes when we are a real threat, when they can see that we have a real chance of changing society, of changing the norms in society, they will try to crush us with outward military violence. And it may start with the police, and it may escalate into things like SWAT, and it may eventually then go into like the National Guard and then to the military and so on. But they are not going to just let us exist. We've seen a countless number of examples throughout history that when you try to build horizontal power structures to dismantle hierarchical power, they will pass laws to suppress you. They will try to evict revolutionaries from things they rightfully own or places that they should rightfully occupy. They will eventually try to hire all kinds of agencies of violence, such as the Pinkertons, if we look back at the Union movement, for example, in the early 1900s here in the United States. Or we can see how they will pass laws that prevent the formation of unions and cooperatives, such as in the United Kingdom back in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And these are just outward expressions of the state's desire, which is to crush us entirely. When that time comes, we are not going to be able to defend ourselves if we are not armed. And it's understandable how people are not excited about that. I'm not excited about that. I wish it were not that way. I wish that there were not going to have to be an armed conflict at some time in the far future. Maybe it won't be in the far future, unfortunately. But in order for an absolute transformation to take place, we will have to be armed. And we are not going to fight a military with, the sorts of implements they have in the UK in the modern day, for example. We're not going to fight a military with knives and rocks. That's not going to happen. Or if we do, we'll lose. It's that simple. And I know that there's this sort of trope Oh, you think that just because you have some guns, you're going to stop the biggest military on earth? They've got helicopters and jets and bombs and so on. Yeah, I understand why you think that, and like why that's your default response, but that very military has been losing wars against decentralized guerrilla militaries, which often only have these kinds of firearms since Vietnam. This military is actually highly hierarchical and is very bad at dealing with flexible insurgent decentral militaries. So I just want to dismiss this idea that the people of these nations, and of any nation, the United States included, are just these defenseless, bystanders who will just be crushed as soon as the military desires. That is the case if we don't train and prepare, but it's not necessarily the case if we do train and prepare. So when that happens, which unfortunately I think is pretty well guaranteed, there will have to be some capacity to defend ourselves. And firearms will be the most obvious choice for that self-defense. Now, I understand that a lot of you are probably not in the United States, and therefore acquiring a firearm is neither easy nor even perhaps legal. And in the conditions, I understand that is very difficult. I'm not going to give you any legal advice. All I'm going to say is, in the places where these firearms are illegal, when the time for outward conflict came, they had to smuggle guns into their country. And that was absolutely not to their benefit that they had to do that at the last minute. In no occasion has that ever been to their benefit. And it will not be to our benefit either if we wait until the last minute to smuggle guns into the country or purchase firearms at the last minute. That is a foolish way to plan for this. Well, okay, what do I make of that? Do we have to live in a society that's absolutely permeated by firearms then? Do I have to surround myself by firearms? Well, I'm not saying that you necessarily need to arm yourself, even though I think probably if you're living in the United States, you should be thinking about it. But I do think that we need to be taking more seriously this sort of training about how to use firearms. And we need to be taking more seriously the education about how to safely be around firearms, how to use firearms, or how to store firearms in your home, for example, in a way which is not dangerous to people. I think that's a really important aspect of this, given that we basically have to have firearms for this later juncture that will take place, wherein we will almost certainly be countervailed by the forces of state and capital. So what we have to do is, in the now, we have to develop a different gun culture. I understand how the gun culture in the United States is absolutely disdainful for the people who live here. And you've got a bunch of, like right-wing macho men trying to determine how everything functions, who completely control the conversation, who are often themselves agents of fascism. They want a very powerful state and the subjugation of women and the eradication of gay people and so on and so on. So I get it. If you don't want to be part of that culture, let me just tell you, I'm not part of that culture. And I really don't see a good reason why you should be either. What we have to do instead is develop an alternative culture, a gun culture which practices healthy behaviors, which has healthy social outlooks, number one. But number two, a gun culture that does not fetishize firearms, that does not look at firearms as something that is desirable for us to use, but as something which is sort of like a grim necessity. I think that the gun culture we need to develop, a sort of radical left gun culture, is one that also sees the value in de-escalation, teaching people how to de-escalate conflicts, not just teaching people how to kill in a snap, to defend themselves from a mugger on the street or something. I think instead we should be asking ourselves, when violence comes, how can it be de-escalated? That's something we should definitely be asking ourselves. And that's something we should be teaching people in an interpersonal sense. How do you de-escalate violence? I think that's very important. Might I add, I think that we need to have, if there is going to be a leftist gun culture, quote unquote, it needs to be a gun culture that is focused around the medical knowledge, the ability to carry out first aid and to help people who are harmed. I think that that's very important. I mean, it's important for a variety of reasons. One is, obviously, if something goes wrong when you are using firearms, you want to be able to help someone who has been harmed. But also, given that we live in a society, back to the United States context here, we live in a society where guns are so common, and unfortunately mass shootings are becoming more common. We need people who are trained to deal with bullet wounds and are trained to deal with the outcomes of violence, and people who are, as unfortunate as it is, trained to function within violent circumstances, dangerous circumstances where bad things are happening. That's absolutely necessary. We are not going to avoid those things by burying our heads in the sand, no matter how much we dislike the fact that guns are implements for violence. So that's the unfortunate reality. And I understand a lot of people are like, we need to be training people how to do hand-to-hand fighting. That has some limited purpose. That's not bad. People should probably learn how to do some, hand-to-hand fighting, but that is not preparing you for a warfare environment, nor even, any kind of urban conflict. Nothing that has to do with revolution. You're not going to be fighting people, or, nothing to do with a civil conflict. You're not going to be fighting people face to face. Much as you might like, jujitsu or Muay Thai, you're not going to be on a battlefield punching people. You are going to be shooting at them. And it is very important that we understand the how conflict actually works in that sense. So above and beyond just teaching people how to use firearms, there should be various aspects of this. There should be one aspect of any group that is focused around developing, a leftist gun culture that is educating the average person about how to be safe around firearms and with firearms. Then there should be some aspect where people are going out to the shooting range together, who are learning to improve their aim and the associated skills with that. You can find lots of examples of groups that are already doing that aspect in, for example, John Brown Gun Club or the Socialist Rifle Association. If you have one of those close to you, it might be a good place to look for kind of the beginnings of what I'm discussing. But we also need to be training on things like small unit tactics. Small unit tactics will teach us how to function together in a way that's safe. If we all just go out shooting at the range, when the time comes that we actually are embroiled in some kind of civil conflict, whether it's in the urban centers or out in the wilderness or whatever, we are going to be dangerous to those around us. No matter how good you are at handling a firearm, no matter how good you are at aiming it, if you don't know how to operate with a group of other people that are on your side who also have firearms, you're going to be probably a danger to those other people ultimately. There's a lot of skills that go into learning how to breach a room, learning how to, keep track of everybody who is on your side, make sure that you're not putting anybody in the line of fire. These are all skills that you need to learn. And if you're not going to just pick them up on the spot. And insofar as you do pick them up on the spot, you'll probably be dangerous to others. So we need to take seriously that we need to be training these skills. And I say all of this recognizing that you know, a lot of people don't want to do what I'm saying. A lot of people don't want to be involved in that. A lot of people don't want to surround themselves with a culture which is constantly thinking about or planning for violence. And I don't either. I don't want a culture that has to be permeated by consciousness of the possibility that violence might take place. But unfortunately, we are living in a society that is declining further and further and further into fascistic violence. The state is becoming more fascistic. Fascistic militias have existed for decades now, and they've been doing everything I just told you. Everything I just told you, they've been going out to target practice. They've been running small unit tactics incessantly. Okay. And so what I want to emphasize is if you're a leftist, we're behind the curve. Don't pretend that we're just going to pick this all up on the spot. These are things that you need to train ahead of time, that you need to think about ahead of time. You need to do at least a little bit of study. If you live in the United States and you're not at, for example, suicide risk, or you're not at risk of harming others, and all I can do is leave that up to you to decide, then you should probably learn how to use a firearm, even if you don't want to own one. And probably you should own one. I mean, given everything we just discussed, like if the time came where there was a civil conflict and our backs are up against the wall, do you really want to go try to purchase a firearm at that moment? Because it's probably going to be the time when you're least able to purchase one. So I'm not trying to urge you to go out and buy one now, you know, be a prepper or whatever, but I want you to think very seriously about this. I want you to have a somber mind about these facts. Societies do not stay stable forever. And when they fall apart, unfortunately, there's a lot of coercive violence that becomes the background of life. And if we just want to ignore that fact and we just want to run from it, we are going to be unprepared and we will be crushed by the absolute worst elements of society. What we have to do is we have to create a culture that is predicated around self-defense, not oppression of others. And we have to create a culture that is healthy, that is not patriarchal, might I add. I think that's one of the most notable components, that does not contain this machismo, which defines the right-wing gun culture that we are all familiar with, which is quite revolting. So I hope that this provided some insight for you. The things that I'm noting right now are why historically almost all revolutionary leftists, anarchists included, have been pro-gun or pro-arming the masses, arming the proletariat, as we might say, because the time will eventually come when, unfortunately, implements of violence will be necessary to defend ourselves. And it is only an impediment to us to be stuck scrambling to figure out all of these skills at the last minute when fascists are obsessively training these very skills. They are obsessively stockpiling military weapons. They are obsessively training small unit tactics and things like this. That is extremely dangerous if there is a time when destabilization is going to come to the United States or anywhere else. And if you're in a nation where you cannot buy firearms legally, don't take any of this as legal advice, because I can't really give you legal advice. I just want you to take everything that I said into consideration here. I want us to be sober about these facts. Even though we may live in societies that seem stable now, history shows no society stays stable forever. So anyway, that is my short ramble on this topic. I hope that was informative for you. If you liked the video, go down and give it a like. If you disliked it, that's fine too. Go give it a dislike. Comment below with your thoughts. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Is there anything I left out? Is there anything you wish I would have emphasized? Please go comment. You know, I hope to see a lively discussion on this topic down below. If the algorithm has brought you back here numerous times and you keep watching these videos and you're here at the end of this video now, you should subscribe to my channel. I produce content like this where I talk about all kinds of different topics from a radical or revolutionary lens. Every single week I drop one of these. Lastly, if you have been watching the channel for a while now, if you think the work that I'm doing here is important and you want to help support the channel, you want to help me produce more videos, you want me to be able to spend more time investing in quality for the channel, you should go become a patron at my Patreon, which is patreon.com/Anark, A-N-A-R-K. And I guess I'll also mention there are YouTube memberships. If you go down below, you can see that there is an option for you to become a member on YouTube. The tiers on Patreon and YouTube are the same tiers, so don't worry too much about that. Any amount that you can pledge to the channel is extremely helpful. I cannot tell you how relieving it is for the channel to be bringing in enough money where I'm starting to be able to support myself. I'm not quite there. I still have to pick up odd jobs from time to time, but I am very close. I feel like within the year, I could be supporting myself just on the channel and devoting all my time to writing scripts for new video essays, doing live streams, producing more Anark Abridged videos, and so on. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, you want to support this channel, please go pledge whatever amount that you can. But that's it. That's the spiel, everybody. I'm not going to make you stick around for anything more than that. I'll see you next time.